Hello friends, it is I, Professional Warrior Has-Been Heavy Metal. On my last guide, people asked if I could go over recommended add-ons, so instead I'm going to do macros this time. Keep in mind, because I'm not a big titty streamer, and I refuse to pay $15 for the abortion that is BFA, I wasn't invited into the closed beta. But I understand Classic will be using the current game's architecture, which means it'll be using the newer macro system. Hopefully. With that in mind, understand that these aren't 100% tested yet, but at the very least, there's still things you're going to want to macro, and after Classic's release, if any of these commands are off, you should still be able to find the correct commands without much trouble. Some of these will be warrior specific, but there's quite a few that'll work for a number of classes. The first macros are baseline for any decent warrior. These two macros will allow you to switch back and forth between using a two-hander or a one-hander with a shield. Looking at the shield macro first, the first line will equip your one-hander, the second line will equip your shield immediately after, and the final line will cast shield block if you push the button an additional time. The third line isn't necessary, but it does free up a keybind for shield block, and it makes sense in my head that pushing it again activates a block. I used to use this for spell reflect and retail, but you don't even need a shield for that anymore. I don't know. Some people will add in an extra line that auto shifts you to defensive stance. I personally don't like that, and will just use my regular defensive stance keybind if needed. The macro for equipping your two-hander is very simple. It's just one line. It's /equip and then the name of your weapon. You can easily input this at the macro screen by typing out /equip and then shift clicking on your weapon. Okay, next is stance specific moves. These are very important macros to increase your reaction time. If you're trying to quickly throw out a pummel or switch to Berserker stance and then use Berserker Rage, they'll shave valuable time off your reaction. I use this macro specifically for Berserker Rage, Pummel, Sweeping Strikes, and Disarm, but it can be used with any stance specific move you want, such as Revenge, Overpower, or Whirlwind. Going line by line, first you have the Show Tooltip command, which will show the tooltip for the assigned move. In this case it's Pummel, and auto-assign the correct icon if left on the question mark. The second line will shift you into the correct stance for what move you're trying to use. For this example, it's Berserker stance because Pummel can only be used in Berserker stance. But if you were writing this for Overpower, it would be Battle stance because, you guessed it, Overpower can only be used in Battle stance. The third line actually casts the move. So, if you haven't heard, in Classic, if you're just starting to attack something, and you click a move but you don't have enough rage, your auto attack won't start, and you'll be stuck standing there like a moron until you click to attack the target. Also, certain CCs that are thrown on you can stop your auto attack. So what this macro does is it binds a start attack command unto your most frequently used moves. I only build it into my Mortal Strike and Hamstring, but it can be done with any attack. The first line again will be Show Tooltip, which we already discussed. The second line is your start attack command, which will begin your auto attack if it isn't already engaged. And the final line is whatever move you're including in this. For example, here it's Mortal Strike. Next is a shield wall macro. This macro is for an emergency shield wall. Your oh shit alarm's going off, you just took a big hit and you're about to die, and you need to go defensive in order to hold out for a heal or buy time. It would be pretty sweet if that could be put into one emergency button, right? Well, here it is. The first line again will be Show Tooltip. Makes sense by this far in the video, I hope. The second line will equip your one-hander. The third line will equip your shield, just like the shield swap macro. The fourth line will put you into defensive stance, and the final line will activate shield wall. 3 different buttons condensed down into one. And I know some wise ass out there is like, well, Heavy, why don't you just include shield wall on your shield swap macro instead of shield block? And you can do that, but if you accidentally hit your shield swap too many times, you're going to blow a 30-minute cooldown for nothing instead of only wasting 10 rage for an accidental shield block. So, I mean, you do the math. Alright, the next macro is a combination for Mocking Blow and Taunt. For those that don't remember, Mocking Blow is an attack and a taunt usable only in battle stance. It's great for getting hunters' pets to stay on you and break their traps, but it has a much longer cooldown than your regular defensive taunt. This is a super simple macro that'll condense these two moves down into one key. If you're in battle stance, you'll be unable to use taunt, so it'll use Mocking Blow. And if you're in defensive stance, you'll be unable to use Mocking Blow, so it'll use taunt. If you want, you can add in a show tooltip line. I don't recommend it, just place this macro on a hidden action bar, and then place both Mocking Blow and Taunt on a visible action bar, so you can be able to see and track their cooldowns. The first line is just /cast Mocking Blow, and the second line is /cast Taunt. The commands do exactly what you think they do. It's a very simple but very handy macro. Now, if you want to bring this macro to the next level, what you can do is add 2 shift command lines that will cause you to use your taunts on your focus target. A good example of when this is handy is if you're fighting a hunter, focus the pet, and then you'll never have to deselect the hunter to actually taunt his pet. Alright, moving on to macros for every class. This first one is a very simple bandage macro that I've used for a long time. The first line is just show tooltip, self-explanatory. The second line will target yourself. You put your character's name after the /target part. The third line will use the corresponding bandage. If you're using a lower tier bandage, put its name on this line instead of where it says Heavy Runecloth. And the final line will target whatever you had targeted beforehand. This all happens in a blink of an eye, and you won't even notice changing targets. Now, there are more advanced bandage macros, such as this one here, that will bandage a friendly target if you have one selected it instead of yourself, but I've never ran into an instance where I needed to or had the time to bandage a friend. Okay, now we have one of my personal favorite macros. Focus Mouse Over. I'm not 100% Focus Target will be in Baseline Classic, but if not, there's a good chance there will be some kind of mod for it. What this macro will do is allow you to hover over an enemy with your mouse and click the macro, setting the enemy as your focus target without ever changing your original target. I found this macro to be extremely useful in Battlegrounds and World PvP. It can be a real game changer, to set a focus target on the fly. To couple alongside the mouse over focus macro, we have attack focus macros. For this example, I'll be using Pummel. This macro will use whatever spell is incorporated into it on your target whenever pushed normally. But if you hold shift and click it, the macro will use the incorporated move on your focus target. For a warrior, this can be used with Disarm, Intercept, Pummel, and a number of other spells, to pretty great effect. For other classes, I don't know, you'll have to use your imagination. Looking at the commands, the second line will cast a spell on your main target whenever the macro's keybind is pushed normally. The third line instructs the macro to use the spell on your focus target whenever the shift key is held and the macro's keybind is pushed. To customize this, simply replace Pummel on all 3 lines with whatever spell you'd like to use. The final macro I have for you is a use gear slot macro. These macros will allow you to swap around items with special effects, such as the Gnomish Mind Control Cap and the Goblin Rocket Helmet, and not need different key bindings for the separate items. If you have gear equipped in the corresponding slot and it has an on-use effect, this macro will activate it. It's also a great idea to bind your trinkets this way, so that after using the trinket effect, if you can pop out of combat and swap to a different one, you can activate the new trinket with the same hotkey. After a 30-second cooldown. It's a very simple one-line macro, but it's super useful and will save you hotkeys. In the on-screen example, your top trinket will be used. If you want a different gear slot, just replace the slot 13 section with the corresponding slot number listed below the macro. Well friends, that's it for me on this one. Hopefully you found a macro or two that'll up your game, and you can quit playing like a complete chump. If there's anything else you'd like to see a guide on, oh god, let me know in the comments. And okay, bye.